A rare meeting with the Belarusian leader and an extraordinary revelation on the whereabouts of Wagner, the Russian mercenaries he's meant to be sheltering. Despite earlier statements, neither its fighters nor its leader, he tells me, have taken up his offer of exile.
As far as I am informed, as of this morning, the Wagner fighters are now stationed at their regular camps where they go for rotation to rest and recover from the front lines. In terms of Yevgeny Prigozhin, he is in St. Petersburg, or maybe this morning he would travel to Moscow or elsewhere, but he is not on the territory of Belarus now.
It wasn't meant to be this way. Lukashenko's deal was how the Kremlin explained how Wagner's armed uprising last month had been brought to an early end. There was even talk of Prigozhin arriving in Belarus and of all charges against him being dropped. That deal now appears in doubt.
And so the offer that you extended to Wagner and to Yevgeny Prigozhin has not been taken up. They are not in your country.
Not yet. This will depend on the decision made by the Russian government and Wagner PMC. If they deem it necessary to locate a certain number of Wagner fighters in Belarus for rest and preparation, then I will keep my promise.
But the Kremlin may have other plans. Russian state TV has for days been painting Prigozhin as a traitor and a criminal, now broadcasting these new images of a raid on his St. Petersburg property, with police seizing weapons, cash and gold, even wigs for disguise, and multiple passports under aliases. The Kremlin told CNN they won't comment on where Prigozhin is or whether new charges may be filed against him. But Lukashenko raised the disturbing possibility of Prigozhin being assassinated before insisting the Kremlin would never do it.
What will happen to Prigozhin next? Well, in life, anything can happen. But if you think that Putin is so malicious and vindictive that he will do him in tomorrow, no, this won't happen.
But clearly, the fate of Wagner and its leader is now in question. Just last week, these satellite images appeared to show a military base in Belarus being prepared for a possible influx of fighters. Lukashenko may now himself have got cold feet.
Is part of this you rethinking the wisdom of inviting a battle-hardened, rebellious, mercenary group into your country? Are you concerned that that would have destabilized Belarus? I mean, the Russians thought it was safe to have them, but, they were wrong.
This is not a situation where I was lending Wagner a helping hand. This was reached in a process of negotiation. You know what was at stake. I made this decision at that time, and I would stick to it. But I don't think Wagner would rise up and turn its guns against the Belarusian state.
But for Belarus, Wagner's absence may yet be a blessing in disguise. Well, Alex, Lukashenko also tried to play down his relationship with Prigozhin, which is surprising because the Kremlin had originally said it was because of the close relations between the two men that a deal between them was done in the first place. But Lukashenko said it was actually Putin who knew Prigozhin best of all. They've been associated with each other for the past 30 years, he said. So it seems that everyone wants to distance themselves at the moment from Prigozhin. Friendship with the Wagner leader has become something of a liability, Alex.
I want to bring in former CNN Moscow Bureau Chief Jill Doherty and CNN military analyst General Spider Marks, and bringing back our senior national correspondent Matthew Chance, who is in Minsk. Thank you all for being with us. Jill, I want to start with you. You are such an astute observer and analyst of the Russian press. How do you see the state media now blaring this news of this raid on Prigozhin's home? That footage is just remarkable.
Well, usually when you see things like this, and this has been done with other enemies of the Kremlin, something is going to happen. And so what they're doing is darkening, the reputation of Prigozhin, showing him as a really rich guy. I mean, everything, the palace that he lived in, the money, the gold bars, et cetera, preparing, I think, the Russian public for the fact that he could be accused by the Kremlin of corruption, because President Putin just a week or two ago already laid the groundwork for that by saying, hey, you know, the government gave Prigozhin about $2 billion, and we hope that none of it went astray, but we will deal with that. So I think, you know, right now it's a little confusing because you have Prigozhin running around Russia, but you also have this possibility that he could be arrested and eventually end up in prison because of alleged corruption.
Certainly a strong message. Matthew Chance, we just saw your back and forth there with the Belarusian president. You were in that room when Lukashenko re-emphasized his loyalty to Vladimir Putin. So how do you read that?
Well, I mean, look, that loyalty to fealty, really, to Putin has been growing ever since 2020, when Lukashenko called on Russia for assistance in putting down unrest, anti-government protests that were very widespread in his country, in this country of Belarus. Since then, his terrible human rights record has led to a high degree of international isolation and sanctions. It's pushed him closer into the arms of the Kremlin, on which he is dependent now almost entirely for financial aid and support for industry. And that means that, you know, a certain amount of sovereignty has been surrendered by the Belarusian leader. When Putin asked to stage his invasion of Ukraine from Belarusian territory, the answer was yes. When Putin said he wanted to put missiles, nuclear missiles, on Belarusian territory, that was agreed to as well. And so I'm not sure at this point there's anything that the Belarusian leader would not do if he is asked by the Kremlin to do it. But I mean, the way he characterizes it, look, we've got a strong relationship and it's getting stronger. That's how he characterized it to me today.
And Jill, when you take all of these moving parts together, how is this playing domestically for Putin?
Oh, I think people are very confused. Obviously, just a few weeks ago, he was the best friend of Putin, somebody that Putin used, both him and his companies, very rich companies, to do all sorts of things that the Russian government needed to be done, but didn't want its fingerprints on it. And now all of a sudden, he's leading a rebellion. And now all of a sudden, he's revealed as a rich, probably corrupt person, which there's no question he is. But I think that the Russian people are probably at this point trying to figure out what's the next step? When does the next shoe fall?
General Spider Marks, our colleague Natasha Bertrand is reporting that the U.S. is going to be announcing tomorrow that it is sending highly controversial cluster munitions to Ukraine as part of a bigger security aid package. Do you think the U.S. should be giving cluster munitions to Ukraine, and how much of a boost could they offer to Ukraine during this counteroffensive?
Well, the short answer is I think they should. I applaud the administration's decision. Look, DPICM, dual purpose, improved conventional munitions, that's what we're talking about, really have the capability within a single bomb to disperse over 100 bomblets, both anti-personnel and anti-armor type capabilities. This is a weapon system that the Ukrainians can use to great effect now that the Russians have this incredible defensive position in Ukraine that they've built up over the course of the last few months. Conventional munitions cannot have that same effect. The DPICM, the cluster munitions can. It's a good decision. But like anything else, look, there's no silver bullet. Ukrainians have to be able to conduct synchronized warfare. And we're seeing right now that they don't have sufficient air support, which is absolutely essential. You got to have this three-dimensional fight, and it all has to be synchronized. So it's a good thing. I think it's going to improve what the Ukrainians can achieve, but they have to be able to continue to bring all this combat power together, be very cautious, very effective on the ground, and then they can exploit.
Yeah, these DPICMs or these clusters are certainly something that the Ukrainians have been asking for quite some time. Russians, we should note, have been firing cluster munitions on Ukraine for quite some time. Jill Doherty, General Spider Marks, Matthew Chance, thanks to all of you. Appreciate it.